Hello and welcome to the second ever Jacked In podcast episode. I am so excited because although I'm alone now, last week I was joined by an individual that I'm a super huge fan of, a Northeast filmmaker. Movie fans will remember him bringing us such treats as Dog Soldiers, The Descent, Doomsday, Hellboy. TV fans will remember him bringing his directorial skills to such series as Game of Thrones, Westworld. But rather than steal any more of the guy's thunder, I'm going to pass things over to Past Jack, whose only credit above me is that he's 7 days younger. Past Jack, take it away. Hello and welcome to the Jacked In podcast. Today I'm joined by fellow Novocastrian, Northeast filmmaker. You'll remember him for the likes of Dog Soldiers, The Descent, Doomsday, Game of Thrones. Someone I'm a massive fan of and so honoured to have him here today. Neil Marshall. Neil, thank you very much for jumping on board today. I'm very grateful.
Hello. No, it's a pleasure to be on. We're
going to start from the beginning, if that's all right with yourself, by talking about one of, my second favourite werewolf movie of all time, Dog Soldiers.
Okay, I assume the favourite one is on the wall behind you.
Very good spot, yeah. American Werewolf in London for sure.
Yeah, American Werewolf
yeah,
is my favourite as well, so yeah. And it was part of the inspiration for Dog Soldiers, of course. I think some of the first horror films I saw was up in Newcastle, age, 10, 11, when the first, I think it was my neighbour had one of the first VHS players in the area, and getting to watch stuff from the video shop then. And some of the earlier stuff I remember watching was American Werewolf and The Howling and Zombie Flesh Eaters and I Spit on Your Grave and stuff like that before some of them got banned. But that was like an early education of horror, really. I was already into, the classic Universal monsters and stuff like that because I'd seen them on television.
Yeah.
And things like, I remember watching Alien on TV when it was first broadcast, and Jaws and things like that. But American Werewolf and The Howling definitely stuck in my mind quite a bit. I always loved the concept of werewolves just as an idea for a monster rather than... I always found that more appealing than vampires and such like. So when it came to making a first feature, I was like, I wanted to somehow make a werewolf movie, even if I didn't have a clue how. And I think also, being massively inspired by the likes of Predator and Aliens and stuff, of like bringing a military edge into it as well was like,
and that's what you do. You do that really well, as it's shown in a lot of your work, your mesh between military and horror. And one of the reasons I think Dog Soldiers works so well is, there was a gap in the market. Like, I'm a huge fan of werewolf movies that approach them from different angles. So, for instance, I really gravitated towards American Werewolf because they did comedy and horror so well. Even the likes of Company of Wolves was sort of that was fairy tale-esque, and you had a different approach. You brought in this sort of military aspect, so there was a gap that you were filling.
Well, yeah, the also like Evil Dead 2 was a huge inspiration when I saw that, of like realizing, when when you take the horror in a certain direction, it becomes really funny as well as being scary. It was like, okay, I'd love to get that kind of tone out of it. My family have a military background. Like, my dad was in the army, my granddad fought in the First World War.
Right.
So I think that was kind of that. I've grown up with stories of the military and that sense of humor that they have. My dad always tells this awesome story because he was in Austria just after the Second World War, and him and his mates used to go down to where the Russians were and throw snowballs at them, and the Russians used to shoot back. It's like, so it's like, what's the mindset of the British, squaddies. I wanted to capture that on film somehow. Also, I was a huge fan of Zulu growing up, so it was just like so many influences went into the pot to make Dog Soldiers, and it all kind of came out that way of trying to get the gallows humor from the soldiers, but also I wanted to do an authentic depiction of British squaddies. I'd seen a few films where
it comes across for sure,
where they weren't really depicted in any kind of authentic light. That banter, that the repartee that they have, the sense of humor, the gallows humor, all of that. You look at something like 28 Days Later, which is an amazing film and I love it, but the depiction of the squaddies in the 28 Days Later is they're all a bunch of psychopaths, and only after 28 days.
Oh yeah.
They've all gone mad. It's that's not authentic at all. There's not one decent one amongst them.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so I was kind of like, I want to do a better depiction of squaddies. I think I'd seen a great thing on TV uh, called An Ungentlemanly Act with Bob Peck in. It's about the
Right.
Falklands War. But that was like one of the only other
Okay.
things where I'd seen like, relatively contemporary squaddies depicted in, as they are. Um, so that was a big thing for me. And when I was casting it, I was very adamant to say to all the casters, so this is a soldier movie with werewolves. It's not a werewolf movie with
Yeah.
soldiers. It's like, it's about these characters. And as you say, it's like a different slant on the werewolf genre. And like most werewolf movies are about the curse. The person who gets bitten,
Yeah.
and it's the curse. Even the Howling, even American Werewolf is that. It's essentially it's the same
Yeah.
story as the original Wolfman. Whereas I wanted to treat my werewolves as the predator or aliens or whatever. It's like they're just the enemy, and we really only care about them in their werewolf form, not their human form. So, I mean, although there's a
And
few
I
twists
totally
and
agree
turns.
with what you've said. It's a soldier movie first, like, and it's interesting that you made the connection of Predator, because now that I think about it, I'm like, oh yeah, it's the exact same. It's a bunch of soldiers and the camaraderie it comes across as well.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's that. I totally agree with Dog Soldiers in that respect.
yeah, yeah,
I think because I watched it at a young age, I didn't realize why I liked it so much, but it was because it wasn't just squaddies; it was squaddies from near my neck of the woods.
yeah.
So the accents and stuff, which is something you don't really see in not just horror but cinema very much. I mean,
No,
the north, anyone from the northeast gets raved about, like the likes of Ridley Scott, and I mean Jimmy Neal was in Howland too, but that's pretty much all we've got to go on in terms of horror. So it
yeah.
was brilliant seeing that
Well,
northeast
yeah, I
influence.
wanted to get those characters in there. It's like there's such a wide range of accents and characters in the UK, and the North is heavily
Yeah,
underrepresented in movies as a whole, but certainly in horror movies. So we'd seen so many Cockneys all over the place and gangster movies and stuff like that. So it was really important, I think. Just I wanted to get some Northerners in there. It's like I think the North is very well represented in the military as well. So yeah, well, that was the thing. I wanted to hear my own accents.
yeah, yeah, and that's where the comedy comes through as well with the northern banter. Like it makes it. It's not forced. It's not thrown in like jokes for the sake of like, oh, we need some laughs to alleviate. It's just like, no, these are guys just like the situation's just funny that they find themselves in, but it comes across authentic, which I absolutely loved about it.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to play it. Everybody plays it essentially straight. It's like it's not played. The
Yeah,
laughs are there, but they come out of the fact that it's played straight. So
absolutely. And it's just little things as well. I mean, the werewolf putting his hand through the letterbox and Spoon just going to town with the frying pan immediately, like just like little laughs like that are just slotted in. And obviously the I hope I give you the shits, absolutely
yeah,
tremendous. Like everyone talks about that to this day. When I talk them about Dog Soldiers, everyone mentions those funny bits.
absolutely. I think that's why it's lasted so long. It's not because of the werewolves, although that's part of it, but it's mainly because of the characters that people just like hanging out with those characters for a while, and their banter. And they don't like seeing them get killed off. But I think that's ultimately why it's got its lasting power.
That's exactly it. You don't like seeing them get killed off. In the one of the things that I loved about it as well. Now, when it came out, I was quite young, so I rented it from the local video shop, but it was one that sort of like mainly specialized in horror. So I always used to gravitate towards that one as opposed to Blockbuster that didn't have the juicier, more niche ones. So I came across Dog Soldiers. But one of the things I love about Dog Soldiers, and this is why I rented it as soon as I saw it, was the front cover. And I'm a huge fan of like old school horror movie VHS covers and posters, but I think like the cover for Dog Soldiers alone immediately catches your eye. The title in itself is sick, but the design. And I was just wondering, sort of, what was it? Was it your brainchild? Was the design of the poster, and also, are there any particular horror movie VHS covers or posters that you love in particularly, or like have a number one favorite?
Well, which cover did you see? Because there's a few different covers, and so I'm not sure which. If it's the UK poster
So
cover, I
it's
think
the
seeing it on your stack there underneath the mic, I think it's the
yes,
second from the top. Um, is that the one that you saw? Because if that's the case, then
yeah, the soldier with the werewolf silhouette. Yeah, The
Yeah, okay,
Werewolf
so
Shadow, I
that's
should
the
say.
UK poster, and for me that was like the best version of the poster because I worked with Pathé and their design company, and we went through so many options to come up with that, but felt that just kind of captured it perfectly. Whereas I think
Yeah,
the American one was just like a werewolf. It was just like a werewolf or three werewolls, and it's just like I don't want to just see the
right.
werewolf like straight off, like. But yeah, so that one was a bit more suggestive. Um, and the title, I don't know, the title came in very, very early on. I'd heard the term dog soldiers, and I just thought that's perfect for a werewolf movie because it applies to the werewolves and the soldiers, like depending on your point of view.
Absolutely.
So I kind of went that way. At one point during the making of it, there was a suggestion of changing it to Night of the Werewolves. Not by me, I must add,
Right.
but that was thankfully that was going to put laid to rest, and we stuck with Dog Soldiers, which is far more memorable and catchy, and yeah, and unique. So yeah, so that was the kind of the poster design process was like because I'm a poster collector myself. I'm obsessed with posters.
Yeah.
And the
Ditto,
way
as you can probably see.
yeah, yeah. Um, I'm kind of between houses at the moment, but if I was in my own house, it would be like that. It would be just covered in movie posters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It usually is. It's usually my office space is just movie poster central. So I love the art form, and so I like to get as involved as I can with the design of a film, and also because it's like it's your movie, and if it's the first thing, like the cover of a book, is if it's the first thing that people see, and it's going to make them either want to see it or not see it, or like
Exactly.
does it sum up the movie? I think it's really important that the director is involved in that process. So yeah, that I stayed in it and helped design that one, and Pathé did a fantastic job of releasing it.
Excellent. No, that's absolutely tremendous stuff. And I'm completely on the same page as you. No pun intended in terms of posters. Like it's it's so nice when we've got well, at the moment especially an array of posters that are all, you can tell, by the same person, especially with the likes of Marvel and Disney and everything like that. So I'm a huge fan of posters, especially in old school
Well, I
posters. The
think
80s is
yeah. I mean,
probably
it's
the
kind
peak.
of like a lot of the films themselves. Is like my favorite posters come from a certain era. They're older posters, so
Yeah.
um, the stuff I love most is from like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't think I've got
Especially
any.
hand drawn, the artwork that
Yeah,
was
I
hand
don't think
drawn
I've
in
got
the 80s.
any posters from the last like 20 years, unless they're the kind of Mondo type, special edition posters or whatever. But since Photoshop came in, it's just kind of lost its edge of the whole poster
Yeah.
design thing, and they're not. They're the thought that goes into them now is purely commercial. It's just about like get the faces on there, get the stars on there.
It's the
Whereas
faces, absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
whereas the older posters were like the cover of a book, that they were something that was designed to sum up the movie in some artistic manner and therefore create a
Yeah,
work of art with them. So I love all that kind of stuff.
absolutely. And I guess to touch on the horror aspect as well, that I know it's a soldier movie first and a werewolf movie second, but just to touch on the werewolves, the reason I liked, and go back to American Werewolf, the reason I liked American Werewolf so much was the werewolf side of things was the design. It was a design that I hadn't seen before, and I was really drawn to like the four-legged design. However, one of the reasons I like Dog Soldiers so much is because it's probably my favorite design for a two-legged werewolf. Like the
Hmm.
stature, the tallness, and the exact same as American Werewolf. You see them, but you don't see them. It's very like less is more. I just wanted to pick your brain on that, really, how the design came about and the choices that you made and showing them on the screen.
Yeah, no, no, definitely. But because I love both of those films equally, but I always thought that like while I prefer American Werewolf as a movie, I prefer the werewolves in The Howling because I just always believed that werewolves should walk around on two legs. It's the fact that it's that turning
Yeah,
the animal into something more humanistic that makes it more terrifying. Now, otherwise, it just becomes
yeah,
like another wolf. It's like might as well be a wolf running around if it's on four legs. So I always sort of had that kind of issue with American Werewolf a little bit, and I think there's a story behind this that I mentioned it in a few interviews and never really thought that much of it. And then years later, I was lucky enough to be on set with John Landis in London when he was doing Burke and Hare. and I was sitting at the monitor,
Oh, wow.
and this guy sat down behind me, and I didn't really clock it. And then Landis comes in, and he says, "Oh, Neil, have you met Rick Baker?" So I turn around, and Rick Baker's there. I was like, "Oh my God, it's Rick Baker! He's like absolute legend."
Jesus.
And he shakes my hand, and he pauses for a moment. He says, "Aren't you the guy who said that the werewolf in London shouldn't walk around on four legs?" And I was like, "Oh shit, I'm on the spot now." And after a while, I was like, "Yes, hands up, I did say that." And he held this gaze for what seemed like an eternity, and just staring at me, and then finally said, "I agree with you. It was Landis who wanted it on four legs. I wanted it on two." I was like,
Oh, wow.
breathed a sigh of relief there.
From Rick Baker himself.
I know. So that was a moment. But no, like back in the beginning, it was always my intention to have them walk around on two legs. That was always the plan. And a friend of mine, actually a sound recordist who I was working with in Newcastle at the time, revealed that he had artistic skills that I didn't know, and he sketched out this concept for a werewolf, just for me off of his own back. And it was unlike anything I'd seen before, because it was really kind of elegant and almost feminine, and kind of like long flowing hair and like shapely curves and things like that. And I was like, this is fascinating. So this is a really interesting route to go down, and having these things be elegant and graceful. And so that was then passed on to the makeup effects guys, and a guy called Dave Bunnywell designed, kind of took that design and embellished it and made it even better. And that's kind of where we worked from that point of view. And when it came to putting people in the suits, because again, I was always going to try and do 100% practical. Putting people in the suits, I actually cast dancers. I went to a studio in London and cast these big dancers. There was like 2 or 3 of them to be inside the suits, thinking that they'd be able to move kind of gracefully and elegantly, and bring something different to it.
Yeah.
Of course, I then put them on stilts, because the werewolf suit had stilts, and then once they had the head on, they couldn't really see except from this tiny little hole in the mouth. So, like, if you take dancers and you put them on stilts and make them blind, all that grace and dignity goes out the window, and they're staggering around, and they were having a hell of a time. And like, bless them, it was hard work. It was really hard work. But so that concept went out the window a little bit once they got used to being in the suits, and once we got them in the house. Like toward the end of the film, the werewolves are in the house, and they could, and I specifically designed them to be taller than the set. So when they entered the house, they had to stoop over a bit, and I thought that gave them like more presence in the house. But what it enabled them to do was that they could hold on to the roof and guide themselves around. They would like hold onto the walls and the roof and stuff. And suddenly, like once they did that, they got all their kind of grace and elegance back, and they started moving around in a kind of really interesting way inside the house. It was like, oh, thank God for that. But when they were outside, they were just like, they looked drunk. They were literally just like staggering around all over the place, falling over each other. It wasn't impressive at all.
It's it definitely looked impressive from by the time it got to the big and small screen. That shot in particular, when your man Pertwee's in the bed, and you did the action perfectly. When you just see that shot of walking, and like I say, less is more, but that one shot, like whenever I recommend this movie to anyone that hasn't seen it, I always make sure to send that picture across, and I'm just like, the werewolves in this movie, look at that sort of thing. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I think that was the other thing, was less is more. Was like, okay, I didn't want to dwell on them too much. Definitely took a leaf out of Jaws for that. Of like, okay, well, if we stay on them too long, the game's up. But if you just get a little glimpse now and then, and so there's a couple of shots in the bedroom there where like you pan up and you see the full size and height and full body of the werewolf for just a split second, but it's enough that it's like, shit, wow. And then from then on, that's what it actually looks like.
Well, I guess moving on from Dog Soldiers, talking about one of my favorite monsters of all time. Now we're moving on to I guess one of my biggest fears of all time, which is claustrophobia, which is why I'm a massive fan of The Descent. And obviously you've clearly got a style in terms of practical effects and everything, but like just starting from the beginning, how did the idea for one of my favorite horror movies of all time come about?
Initially, it came out of necessity as much as anything. Was I wanted to follow up Dog Soldiers. I was originally pitching this zombie movie set on an oil rig that it was a
Right.
I'd done a feature version of my graduation film. So I did this zombie movie for my graduation film at what was Newcastle Polytechnic, is now Northumbria University.
Yes.
And so I'd done this 20-minute zombie film, and so at some point I'd taken that concept and I'd embellished it into a feature. And so after Dog Soldiers, when people are saying, "Well, what have you got? What else have you got?" I was like, "Well, I've got this thing. It's zombies on an oil rig." And I pitched it to a company called Celador Films, and they said they loved it, but clearly it was way out of their league budget-wise. It was just too expensive. It was like they couldn't see how we could pull off all the. There was lots of weird kind of thing-like effects and stuff like that going on with the zombies and stuff like that, and they couldn't figure out how to do that. So they said, "Have you got anything else?" Well, I was living up in Newcastle at the time, and so every time I wanted to go to one of these meetings, I'd get on the train, go down to London, then hop on the train, go back. So I left this meeting thinking, "Shit, have I got something else?" And got on the train, and by the time I got to Newcastle, I'd come up with The Descent. And I think it was like partly inspired by, I think at the time there was, I mean, obviously films like Alien and The Thing and stuff like that of like claustrophobia and contained situations. There was also there was somebody written a review of Dog Soldiers, which had said that it's great that somebody's made a British horror film, but it's still very tongue in cheek and it's full of humor and stuff like that. But like, when's somebody going to make a truly scary British horror film again? And I kind of thought that was like somebody throwing down the gauntlet, So I took that as a challenge and thought, right, how can I make a really, really terrifying film? And at some point, the idea of caves came into it. It was like, let's make a horror film set in a cave, because I hadn't really seen that before. And then the claustrophobia came from that. And obviously I wanted to do a monster movie in caves because I like monster movies. But when I conceived the whole thing, I kind of figured maybe 2 people out of 10 suffered from claustrophobia. But since I've made it, I've realized it's more like 9 out of 10. Just the fact that's the thing.
And if they weren't claustrophobic beforehand, they definitely will be after watching The Descent.
I might have made a few claustrophobics, but but I mean, it's just the fact that that's really what people talk about more than the creatures. Although the people like that aspect too, but the thing that really gets shakes people up is the claustrophobia. And and we designed it.
Same with, I mean, like that. You said the same thing with the likes of The Thing. The alien's scary, but it's the paranoia that's a character in itself.
Yeah.
And I would argue that it's the exact same with The Descent. Claustrophobia is the main antagonist, aside from the crawlers.
So. I mean, and we designed the look of the film as well around that. And as I said, I did some research and looked at some stuff with caves in movies, and was like, they're all overlit. Like there's beautiful shafts of light coming from places that they shouldn't come, to make these caves look beautiful, to show off your sets. Yeah. And I was like, well, okay, in order to pull this off on a budget, we're not going to do that. And I also want to make it really, really oppressive in terms of claustrophobia. So what we should do with this is that, the only light sources in this film is what the characters take into the cave with them, which is how it would be. Yeah. You've got torches, you've got lamps and flashlights and flares, whatever it is, but that's it. There's no other light. And so, I had to design the whole script around how the hell they were going to light themselves in the scene, and when they all split up, like who had which light source, who had the snap lights, who had the flares, who had the torch, who had the fire. So, which also gave them a kind of a color scheme and a visual dynamic of like knowing, well, that's that group because they're in green light, and that's this group because they're in fire. And so you could instantly follow the characters that way in the dark. But I knew there was going to be large sections of the screen that were going to be pitch black, and I wanted it that way. Because I took myself and the cast went caving as kind of research in the Peak District, and when we were doing pre-production for the film, and we experienced the whole thing of doing that and seeing how dark it was down there, and then at some point you turn off all your lights and experience pitch black, which if you've not experienced it, because you tend, even if you shut your curtains or whatever, it's like that's not pitch black. Like pitch black is like you cannot. Your eyes are wide open. You can wave your hand right in front of your eyes. You cannot see a thing, and it's so disconcerting. And I can see why people freak out about it. And it's like being blind, and it's scary. So yeah, it's trying to capture that on the film was a big part of it.
And I guess you were obviously post Dog Soldiers, like you're sort of coming into your style now, realizing what you like, because it definitely shows in the rest of your work. But this being your second movie around, there's certain things that it's like, I like how he does that. Like, for instance, the lighting, you made the same thing with Dog Soldiers, and sort of the night vision, you use lighting tremendously to your advantage, and the exact same with The Descent, more so. But also, one of the things I love about your work is your love of practical effects, especially with the crawlers. I was just wondering if that was the sort of thing that you like. You always knew that's how it was going to be, or by the time you came around with The Descent, you just sort of like discovered that's what you love and that's what you prefer to do?
I think that's what I've always loved. I mean, whenever whenever people ask me like, what's your favorite monster movie? What's the best monster movies? I always go back to a handful of films, which are, Alien and Predator and The Thing and American Werewolf and The Howling, and they're all practical effects. And they look as good now as they did when they first came out. Whereas, this was like when CG was coming up to, taking over, and stuff that's only a few years old looks dated already. Just it doesn't hold up as well. So it was partly that, partly that CG is an amazing tool, but it works best when it's enhancing reality and stuff like that rather than replacing it. And creatures that are. And it's why Jurassic Park, the first one, still stands up, because they had the sense to use the CG in the wide shots and practical effects for the close-ups. And it still looks flawless. So it was like bringing all of these kind of techniques to it of like, okay, we'll use CG for certain things, but not the creatures, because fundamentally they're meant to be human anyway. So we're going to get a bunch of,
absolutely,
as it turned out, a bunch of Geordies who playing the creatures and stripped down and covered in KY, and they got their makeup on, and they look disgusting, and and do it that way, and it's it will hold up better. It means when characters are fighting with them, they're going to physically be fighting with them, and it's going to make it gives it that raw edge, So. That was my thinking behind it.
No, and I guess one of the things as well is something which definitely should be commended, especially in the world of horror, because they don't always get treated, especially in 80s horror movies. But the full woman cast, was that like sort of something that was always going to be the case from the get-go? Or
it was something. I mean, it came in very early on. I never wrote a version of the script that had men in it. So it was very early on, the concept of having all female cast, and part of that was like doing research into that world of caving and climbing, and seeing that it's a totally kind of even spread of like men and women. There's amazing women doing all this kind of crazy shit, climbing and caving, and those kind of adventure sports. And I just thought, well, in this day and age, why wouldn't it be a bunch of women going out and doing this stuff? And why hasn't there been a film like this made before? So let's do that, and and just not sexualize the characters, just have them as a bunch of women going off and doing this thing. And and I had to fight for that a little bit as well. It's like there was someone at Pathé. I'll not mention his name, but someone at Pathé had said like, we have to have a scene where the girls find an underground lake and they all take off their clothes and go swimming, and I was just like, if that's the film you're wanting to make, that's not the film I'm making. So you can have that scene, but I'm walking, or I'll stay and we don't have that stupid scene, because that's not what we're doing here. And they got with the program eventually, and they were fine. But yeah, I mean, this is the kind of hurdles you have to cross to get there. And I think it was the other thing was like, I
That's
can't have them
absolutely,
all running around dressed like Tomb Raider in kind of bikini tops and shorts. It's like
yeah.
that's completely impractical. I mean, they're going to be clothed, they're going to be in practical outfits for doing this kind of stuff. And it was still like, it was six beautiful women. So, you know, anybody who wants to get that side of things is going to be happy. But that's not what this film's about. You know, we're not. It's not making a titillating film. We're making a horror film here. It's going to be scary.
And that's what I love about it as well. I mean, like I say, these are the women are empowered, but like the sex doesn't play a part in it, and I really enjoyed that of it as well. One of the things about The Descent is, and I didn't realize this until later on, is that audiences across the water didn't necessarily get the same ending that I did.
Yeah. So that was down a few factors. One was we'd heard when we were making The Descent, we'd heard that there was another caving horror movie being made, which is like, you know,
Yeah,
you wait for 20 years and then two come along at once kind of thing. It was always, it's
yeah,
the way with movies. I don't know how that works, but this was a much bigger budget film. It looked set from our point of view. We were like the little engine that could. We were the underdog, and there was this big Hollywood, bigger budget cave movie being made. So this
yeah.
was in January, and we were filming, and we heard that they were coming out in like August sometime. So we actually did this. I don't even know how we did it now, but like we were filming in January. We had The Descent in cinemas in July, which for a movie is like, that's fast. That's very fast. So we got it shot. You know, we finished shooting in March. So like April, May, June was all post production, and then we had it in cinemas in the UK and then around the world in its original form. By this point, Lionsgate had come on board to release the film in the US, but they decided that rather than try and get out before The Cave came out, because that was the name of the other film, The Cave, rather
Yeah.
than try and beat it out, that they would actually wait nearly a year into the following year before releasing the movie.
Right.
So their release was delayed. Like, it was a good year after ours, and by the time they released their film, you know, it was already out on DVD in the UK. It was already out, you know, around the world in its correct
Yeah.
form. Anyway, so Lionsgate did some test screening with it, and they screened it with the original ending, and it scored very, very well. And then they screened it with that last 30 seconds cut out, which suggests that she gets out of the cave, and the scores went through the roof. And so they
Right.
approached us and said, "Look, so here's the deal. It's like, we'd like to release it with the ending cut slightly changed, but we need your permission. However, what we'll say is, like, if you want to stick with the original ending, we'll put it out in like 1,000 screens, and if you let us cut the ending, I think we've got real potential here, and we'll put it out in 3,000 screens." So for us, it was kind of a no-brainer, because I was thinking, well, to all intents and purposes, the rest of the world has seen the original ending, and anybody in the States
Yeah.
could get on Amazon and order the original ending on DVD. So fuck it,
Yeah.
what the hell? It's like, you know, let's have the big release. And so they did. So they gave us the 3,000 screens or whatever it was, and it got the much bigger release and more publicity and all this good, groovy stuff. But now, once it came out on DVD and Blu-ray in the US, it came out in its supposed uncut form. All that means is that it's got the last 30 seconds tagged back on again, so it's the original version. So it's actually quite tricky to find that cut version now. The version that you'll most likely find is the UK version, the original version. So, and you know, my whole,
it's the one I joined.
yeah, the argument is you know, this is typical of, I don't know, it's an American sensibility, and I don't always get it, but the theory being that it was a happier ending because she gets out of the cave. But my whole
Yeah.
thing was like, that's a much worse ending for that character. It's like, yeah, sure, she's out of the cave, but all her family are dead. Like, all her
Yeah.
friends are dead. She's killed some of her friends. She's out of her mind at this point. Like, all she's going to do is
Yeah.
get, you know, either thrown in jail or, you know, thrown into a mental asylum for like the rest of her life. I mean, she's fucked. There's no happy ending there. At least in my original version, she may have lost her mind, but inside her psyche, she's with her daughter again. And I thought that
Yeah.
the happiest that it's ever going to get for her. She's with her daughter in here, you know, trapped down there. But you know,
I've never looked at it
neither of
that
them are
way.
necessarily happy. But I
Yeah,
wanted to
it's the
do
happiest. It's the
the
happiest.
happiest version, I thought. You know, and it was heavily inspired by the likes, you know, the endings of The Thing and actually the ending of Brazil, Gilliam's movie Brazil.
Yeah.
There's a similar concept there, where you know, happier in your own madness is kind of like a thing, as opposed to the reality setting in. So yeah, so I wanted to do a really bleak ending because I love a good bleak ending for a horror movie.
I'm the exact same, which is why I gravitated towards it so much. And that's a brilliant comparison with the likes of Brazil. I'm all for it. Again, funnily enough, another ending that was changed to a happier one for audiences. They went
Yeah,
through the same trials and tribulations.
yeah, absolutely. Because there's
Mentioned
the
that.
ones from that period. I think The Exorcist actually has a happy ending in a way, you know, but The Omen, I always thought The Omen was cool because that didn't have a happy ending. It's like,
Yeah.
so you know, but I like bleak endings for horror films.
I'm the exact same, but it's funny that you say that, and I think one of the reasons you said, well, if she got out, obviously it wouldn't have been the best life for her. But on that note, obviously there was a sequel based
Yeah,
on the other ending,
yes.
and I was going to pick your brain on that. Your thoughts on the Descent sequel?
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing is it's not based on the other ending. It's not based on either ending. It's like she suddenly appears in a lake somewhere, and you're like, what?
Yeah,
Where does that pick up from? It's a
yeah.
bit of a mess, and it was a film that never should have got made. I did say at the start, I
Did they
said, you
approach
know,
you first, or
they approached me first. They said they are going to make a sequel. You know, do you want to be a part of it? And I said, well, first of all, don't make a sequel. It's all there. There's nowhere
yeah,
to go with it unless you make it about a different set of characters or something like that. But no, they wanted to make a sequel no matter what, and they had the right to do it. They didn't have to, you know. Didn't have to have me on board, so they went ahead and did it. And it's what's interesting about it is that the thought process that I went through when writing it in terms of like how the hell each scene was going to be lit was not applied to
hmm
that script. And so it's lit, even though it's the same DOP, he was faced with the problem of like, well, the characters aren't carrying any lights now, so I've got to have to light the set. And it looks terrible by comparison. It's just not nearly so good.
it has a completely different look. I knew straight away because I watched it. I watched it when I was like much younger, but straight away I knew that it wasn't the same tone, it wasn't the same vibe. And then I looked and I was just like, unsurprisingly, you weren't behind it. I was like, well, it doesn't
Yeah.
look like the first one at all, so that's not too surprising.
Well, my other thing was so like if you're going to go ahead with this thing and like if you're going to bring the original cast back or at least some of them, it was kind of like you have to find a way to compel Sarah to go back into those caves. What would
Yeah,
make Sarah want to go back in those caves? And I mean, my idea
nothing.
was like, well, you know, like
Realistically, nothing.
well, nothing, yeah. But the only thing I came up with was like, what if a local child went missing? You know, and there was a child gone missing, and they believe she's in the caves. And it's like, okay, well, for
Yeah,
Sarah, that's like we could do the kind of Ripley Newt kind of vibe or something like that with it.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
so I thought maybe that would compel her to go back into the caves. But instead, they came up with the amnesia thing, and it was just like that's just I don't know. To my mind, that's like a lazy writer's solution to a problem, which is not a good one. So
No,
yes,
they
it generally
clearly just
shouldn't have
wanted
ever got
to.
made, and it should be erased from
Yeah.
the canon.
Well, it's been erased from my memory, so you'll be happy to know that.
And it really, really pissed me off that they brought back Juno, who was left to die at the end of the first film,
Yes.
and they brought back Juno and they stole her pants. Like, so she's suddenly running around in like hot pants and shorts and stuff like that, just to make it a bit more sexy. And
Yeah.
it's just like, oh my god, it's just like everything that we tried to achieve on the first film has just been eradicated with this kind of attitude. So yeah, very frustrating.
No, I can imagine. Well, like I say, I'm glad that you weren't on board, and I mean that in the best possible way, obviously. But I guess from moving on, get the nasty taste of the Descent to our mouths. Moving on to so you did Dog Soldiers and you did The Descent, but you sort of gravitated more towards action with your next movie, which I know you're a big fan of and something that you always saw yourself doing, and you just got into horror as a sort of in. But your next movie was Doomsday, and I just
Yeah.
wanted to sort of like talk about that and sort of see how where that originated from and why you made that sort of your next choice and just sort of decided to veer away from horror, even though those elements are still there, sort of, but not as much as you're
Yeah, I
to.
mean, it was always the case. I never really wanted to be known just as a horror director. You know, the films that inspired me, the films that made me want to become a filmmaker, initially were not horror films. It was like Raiders of the Lost Ark and stuff like that. So I always wanted to do action stuff, and that's kind of where I always gravitated. So even with Dog Soldiers and Descent, I wanted to get action in there somehow, like make it
Yeah.
action. Action stuff and mixed with the horror. And I like action horror as a genre. It's kind of like Aliens and stuff like that. It's action horror. It's great. So when I had the opportunity, and off the back of Descent, and I guess, off the back of the success of Descent, was people were finally coming to me and saying, well, what do you want to make next? And I had this idea in my pocket of Doomsday. Was like, shit, I might not get this opportunity again. It's like I could go and make somebody else's thing, or I now have the opportunity to make one of my things, but on a bigger budget and a bigger canvas. So I pitched Doomsday to the studio, and they went for it. And I look back on it now and think I can't believe that I managed to talk people into giving me the money to make that film, because it's completely insane. It not only is it insane, it's like it goes against the grain of everything that Hollywood's making now. It's like this film would never get made today, because it's like it doesn't have a big star in it. It doesn't really have an American angle to it at all. It's all set in the UK. It's all British characters and British actors. So this film would never get made now, and I'm amazed it did then. So I'm really pleased that I got it made. That I got a big post-apocalyptic action movie set in the UK, which tell me the amount of those kind of films that exist is you can count them on one hand. So just pulling that off was an achievement, and I had the best time making it. It was so much fun just to have all the toys. We had loads of time to film it. We had all the toys with the stunt teams and the equipment and the cranes and the explosions and the guns and all that kind of stuff. It was like for the because Dog Soldiers and Descent were made on low budgets and were like it was tough. But this time, although you never have enough time, but this was a comfortable amount of time to do the right job and throw everything on screen. And so even though I think the budget was like around about $28 million.
Right, okay.
Which nowadays is like it's nothing. But for me it was like I still wanted to make a film that looked like it cost about 60 or 70. So, and I think
it definitely like looks like a big budget for sure.
Yeah, I think I achieved that. And I got to go to South Africa and Scotland and shoot on location, and it was an absolute blast. I mean, I had an absolute hoot making it, and the fact that it then opened and completely tanked was like, sad, very sad. But it's since
I only found out after the fact, because I watched it as soon as it came out, and I thoroughly enjoyed it again. And it had your style all over it. You were able to mesh the grime with the comedy, like a brilliant soundtrack. But like it's the humor when he's dancing on stage to find young cannibals. I mean, obviously, the choice of that band is absolutely stroke of genius considering that they are. But the dance was just like, I was like, this is hilarious, but these people are horrendous.
I love that dark humor. I mean, I always said when watching it with an audience, I said if you get to the point where the rabbit gets blown up, if you laugh at that, you're going to get the rest of the film. If you don't, then you're probably not going to enjoy the rest of the film. But it just gets more and more outrageous as the film goes. But some of the cannibals come in and they're dancing and all that kind of this. I just wanted to like go completely crazy, just like throw in all sorts of ideas and craziness, and bring my kind of horror sensibility some of the action sequences as well, because it's pretty violent, it's pretty gory.
The gore in it turned my stomach, and I'm a person that'll watch any horror under the sun. But for some reason, when I think about something that turned my stomach, and it's a two-part question. So the first part, which is one of the most stomach-churning scenes, but I'll ask first. What have you got against Sean Pertwee? Because you just put him through it whenever he's in one of your movies. Like, what did he do to you? First, Dog Soldiers, getting his intestines torn out, and then just getting eaten to bits.
I love Sean a bit. He's the most wonderful, wonderful human being. And actually, he said that the reason he signed up to do Doomsday was because of that death scene. Was like because ultimately,
Right.
the character up until then was fine, and he did a great job with it, but it wasn't as solid as Sergeant Wells in Dog Soldiers. But then he read that death scene and he was
Yeah.
like, "Fuck yeah, I want to do that death scene," which was like
Brilliant.
was epic.
I don't know why it has such an effect on me, and I was wondering what you used for the meat. It's very brief, but it like when Sean was getting eaten, essentially, I was wondering how you did that scene and what you actually used for the meat, because it looked in a way that I've never seen in a cannibal movie before.
Okay, well, I mean, it is real meat. It wasn't real Sean, but it is real meat. So this, I think it was the second unit or something like that, and it was when we were filming the big crowd scenes anyway. But they got a whole pig and spit roast it, and got some shots of them cutting into the pig and stuff like that, and pulling all the so it was like we got some of the extras in, and then once it was properly cooked, it was all served up and everybody feasted on it. So it didn't go to waste. It was eaten, but it
Well,
was
that's good.
but it was based on the whole thing of like human flesh being very similar to pork. That we were known as the long pigs to cannibals, or
Yeah.
super long pigs, so because we taste or look like pork. So yeah, I wanted to try and make it as authentic as I possibly could, and use real meat because it's
That's
like you can't
and
fake
it,
that.
it definitely came across.
But then I thought,
Yeah.
okay, so
No, look.
this is really gnarly when you boil it down to the boil it down. When you when you think about it in realistic terms of like, oh my god, they're cooking this guy, they're cutting him up and they're eating it. That's really disgusting. But when you see them throwing out paper plates for everybody, then that's really funny. So I liked all that stuff.
And to Susie and the Banshees as well. I was just like, this is like cool and like minging at the same time. It's absolutely brilliant.
Well, I'm a huge fan of all that kind of 80s stuff and punk stuff, and Susie
Oh,
and
the
the Banshees.
soundtrack's tremendous for
Yeah,
Doomsday.
Spellbound has got to be one of
Yeah.
my all-time favorite songs. So just to get a chance to use a bit of Susie, a bit of Adam and the Ants, to put
Yeah.
Frankie Goes to Hollywood on the chase scene and stuff like that was just like, it was awesome just getting to use all that stuff.
Well, I was late to the party for Mad Max. Like, I watched that way too late in life. But when I did watch Mad Max, straight away, I was like, reminds us of of Doomsday. But I rated Doomsday higher because of the soundtrack and because of the comedy.
All right,
So
yeah.
it was just funny that I watched Mad Max after the fact. I was like, it's like not a lame version, but that's where my mind was. I was like, it's like a less entertaining Doomsday, this movie. But that's once again because of my British sensibilities.
Yeah, no, I wanted to pack it full of that kind of British sensibility. I was like, I like to get that into my work. It's part
Yeah.
of who I am, and I wanted to give my films a bit more of a voice that makes them stand out. And it's kind of, I think that's possibly why it didn't work in the US. Like, I think that when they marketed it as very much a very straight Mad Max kind of film, and so that humor was very much lost
Yeah.
on the audiences. And the whole thing
That's
was,
a shame.
it was a love letter to 80s movies, to all the movies I saw in the 80s, be it Mad Max and Escape from New York and Excalibur and God knows what else. It's like everything just got thrown in there. And I was kind of doing what I think, what like Tarantino does in all his films, or like what he did in Grindhouse, is like, paying homage to all these amazing films. But for whatever reason, I got completely, brutalized by the critics for it. But well, it's
I was
got a
going to say
growing
not too
audience.
dissimilar to Tarantino.
Yeah,
With
it's
his
got a,
Grindhouse homage, the same thing happened to him with
yeah.
Death Proof. Unfortunately, it was eaten alive by the critics, but another movie that I thoroughly enjoyed. It was a
I know, it's
gorgeous
great.
love letter, same way yours was.
It's like clearly a love of cinema comes through the work. But over the years now, I have more and more people coming to me saying how much they love Doomsday, and COVID was kind of weird as well. It's like that suddenly took it to another level. And there was one point it was announced on the news on COVID that they were closing the border between England and Scotland, and I was just like, oh my god, it's Doomsday! They're going to build a wall. It's all coming to life. Surreal, very surreal.
Brilliant. No, I bet. And I mean, on that note, I think it's a good segue talking about how that was your love letter and how that was sort of that movie had a lot of you all over it. And we can make this as brief as you want, but to move on to a movie that that you've said in the past doesn't have any of you in it. Hellboy.
Yeah.
I guess a movie that's left a bit of a sour taste in your mouth, but just a bit about that. I mean, I know that you didn't write it, unlike your other movies, but it's start at the beginning, I guess. But once again, we can move on sharpish if you wish.
No, I mean,
did someone approach you with the project?
Well, again, it's one of those things. Is like I get people coming up to me now all the time saying how much they like my version of Hellboy, or they prefer it to the other versions, whatever. Which I don't want to be disingenuous to them, but my own experience of the film was not a happy one. That I was caught between two powerful producers, one who owned the rights to the film, had the money for the film, and they hated each other. Right. So, and one couldn't do anything without the other. So it was and I was stuck in between somewhere. So it was like this, and there was just a huge amount of interference that just really just didn't make it a pleasant experience at all. And because it wasn't my baby, I hadn't written it, and the script was not great. So you can't polish a turd. It is what it is. It is what it is.
Did someone just approach you with the script? How did it end up on your desk? How did that?
Pretty much. I mean, I'd been working in the US. I'd been primarily working in TV for like 9 years. I couldn't get after Centurion. Yes. I couldn't get a film made. The industry was changing. The kind of budget levels I was working on in the UK weren't being made anymore. And I just kind of found myself between a rock and a hard place. And I was working in TV, which I was thoroughly enjoying. But my passion is for features, and I just wanted to make a feature. And eventually the script landed on my desk, and I was told that what they wanted to do was the horror version of Hellboy. And so I thought, okay, well, that sounds good. We could have fun with that.
Absolutely.
But I was literally, it was like, you've got to do it, but we're going to tie both hands behind your back, and, you're not allowed to write it. And frankly, we're not really going to make a horror version. We're going to make a really excessively gory version, but it's not going to be a horror version. And I just kind of really missed the point and missed an opportunity, I think, there. So it is what it is.
Oh no, absolutely. My hopes were well and truly raised, because I know that the originals have a massive following, and I love that director's style. But those movies weren't necessarily for me, like the fantasy side of things. But as soon as I saw you were attached to the remake, I just thought, I just loved your style, and again, it was sort of promoted as a sort of the horror version.
When people see it now, it's like it's got massive amounts of CG gore in it, which should be, if you know my work, should be a big clue that wasn't me. That I didn't do that. But the misconception is that because it's I brought the gore to the element, to the movie. I did not. All that gore was added in kind of pretty much after I'd left. So if I'd been doing it, it would have been practical. It would have been blood and guts all over the place on set if I was going to be doing it. But but I didn't do all that CG stuff. So I don't know. It's one of those things, isn't it?
No, it's exactly like you say. I think that's the best way to put it. It's one of those things, and I know that you've said
when I was in the editing room, what I did with it was I filled it full of really cool music. I had the Smiths and stuff on there, and I thought if it's going to be set in the UK, which quite a lot of it was, I was like, let's put lots of British music on it. And then ultimately all of that was just stripped away, and I don't think there's anything remaining of that.
So I guess on that note, because obviously there's very little of you on that movie, if anything, that you've already said. But is there any part of the movie? Is there, and then you were like, I'm happy with that. That bit's me. Is there any of that in the movie at all?
There's one sequence involving the Lobster Johnson. There's a flashback to World War II, and that is that's my favorite scene in the whole movie. And that's the one where it's a little bit brief, but I got to do like some Nazis and some GIs and a shootout and some action, and that suddenly felt like I was in my world there. And that piece I'm really, really proud of.
Your strengths all over. Yeah.
That was fun.
I love that.
That was fun. I mean, the thing is like, as I say, people love the movie, so I don't want to be disingenuous to them. I can only talk about my own personal experience about it, and not, the movie is what the movie is.
No, and that's a brilliant way to put it. I guess moving on, but on one last note, on Hellboy, into something I'm curious about. Given your experience on that, has it sort of disheartened you from attaching yourself to any comic book movies going forward? But if they're if a comic book, if the right comic, are there any comic book movies that you would love to do in the future, or have you sort of like washed your hands of that sort of thing?
I don't know. I mean, given the sheer amount of comic books out there, graphic novels and stuff like that, I'm sure there's some great stuff out
Yeah,
there that I've maybe never even seen before. But it would, I would love to do as a movie. I mean, but I've always said like there's some great stuff in like 2000 AD that I grew up with. I always fancied doing a Rogue
yeah,
Trooper movie, but that's Duncan Jones is doing that now. And then I was like, well, what about Flesh? There's a fantastic series called Flesh in 2000 AD about hunters going
yeah,
back in time to hunt dinosaurs for their meat because everyone's starving in the future or whatever. When you think about it, it's like, well, that's ridiculous. Why would you go back to dinosaurs? Why not go back and hunt, something easier? But regardless, it was like that would be a kind of fun thing to do. But on the whole, the Hellboy experience just made me realize that what I want to do is like in the same as like Tarantino and Edgar Wright and people like that, is just focus on my own scripts, my own projects, and even
yeah,
if it means going back and doing low budget stuff, which it has, at least I will feel better at the end of it. I might not have as much money or get paid as much or whatever it is, but if I've got 100% creative control, it's just way more satisfying to me as a creator and a storyteller than having
yeah,
all the money in the world but zero creative control. So I flipped that on its head, and the next thing I did after Hellboy was The Reckoning, where I literally had no money but 100% creative control. And even though that had its own trials and tribulations, it was ultimately a much more satisfying experience. And then, from that did The Lair, and then I've done a couple of things after that as well. But it's all working as an independent filmmaker, which, as it turns out, is no way to make a living. But
but you're
one
making what you love and what
endeavor
you
to
want to do.
persevere. It's like you've got to fight the good fight.
Absolutely. I mean, you brilliantly set up the next movie I was going to touch on as well. One of your more recent ones, which is The Lair. And that was just a very good. I don't know how else to put it. It was a very good Neil Marshall time, military and horror. Like back to what I love about your movies.
I
Um,
suppose, yeah,
the
I suppose it was running for home a little bit of going back to my roots and wanting to do something else with military and horror, but I primarily with that one was
yeah,
just like I just wanted to make a B movie, a full on B movie like
yeah,
that again doesn't really get made anymore. But like the kind of stuff that I loved in the 80s, it's just a good old monster romp. It's not to be taken too seriously. 90 minutes or whatever it was, 95 minutes or something long. Just get in, get on with it,
hmm
have a good time, make some fun characters, a good few laughs, some nice gore, and shit tons of action, and
yeah.
just have some fun with it. And I'm really pleased with the
And
result.
it was totally like B movie. Like I'm a huge fan of B movies, and I noticed the sort of the similarities from the get go. I think the first creature that I saw like burst out the tank in the design. It was a much more deadly version, but straight away my mind went to Tarman from Return of the Living Dead.
Right? Yeah,
If you've ever
yeah,
seen that,
yeah. Of
but
course.
more like more Neil Marshall esque,
Brains.
obviously.
Yeah. No,
But
again,
I
it was
loved
like
them.
wanting to do practical effects, wanting to get the guys in suits and then enhance them with CG and stuff like that,
Yeah,
and create some kind of just fun creature and some wacky backstory behind it about the whole invasion of Afghanistan by the Russians being a cover up for an alien, their version of Area 51 and Roswell and stuff like that was
yeah.
like I just thought that was just fun.
The gore as well is fun. It's what you don't see in movies anymore. I think the peak for me is when your man's in the lift and fist just comes through the back of his head and out of his mouth. It was very brain dead sort of like gore, and I was just like, I need more of this in contemporary movies. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, the other one was when one of the characters blows himself up, and then like we just got to like
Yeah,
shower the rest of the cast in all his entrails and bits and pieces. That was fun.
I love that. I bet it was. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Very envious. Very envious of that. But I guess what if this is sort of like the end of the movie segment, but out of your catalog, do you have a sort of a favorite or a favorite moment, even to be more specific, out of your whole movie catalog?
Ooh, that's tricky. I don't know, because each of them has their own. It's like the
It's like
making of.
Sophie's Choice, I suppose.
Well, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But the making of Descent. The making of Doomsday was just a hoot. I had such a blast making that film. It was such fun. Within the films themselves, I don't know. I couldn't. Could it be Dog Soldiers or Descent? It's like which one am I most proud of? Or Doomsday is fun, and Centurion's got its moments as well. And I think when you said that, there's one moment that springs to mind, and it's the one in the Descent, and it's where Juno accidentally stabs Beth in the neck. That moment,
it's a brilliant scene. My heart sank so much at that moment.
It's like watching an audience watch that moment every time if they don't know it's coming. Of like, I was really like screwing with the audience's perception of things. Of like, whatever we think of Juno, she's fierce and she's gonna fight like a tiger, and we root for her and we're right behind her, and she's killing this monster, and the monster's just killed somebody else. And it's like she's going for it, and we're right behind her, and then suddenly she turns around and whack, and just because of her adrenaline is just pumping, and she just turns and poof, does it, and it's like, and it just gets the audience every time of like, oh fuck,
and that's exactly it. It's the best. It's one of the best oh fuck moments in horror movie history for me.
Trying to manipulating the audience to get that response is a lot of fun. So maybe that, I don't know, tricky one.
I mean, it's a brilliant choice, and I would have to argue that that's up there for me as well in your movie moments. Like Dog Soldiers might be the peak for the movies, but once again, that's because of my Northeast heritage. But that scene, I don't think any movie in your whole catalogue. Yeah,
there seems to be the love for that film continues, more than any other. So yeah, I'm very proud of it.
No, that's and I guess on that note, I was just going to touch from someone from the Northeast that is a huge film fanatic and sort of right in filmmaking as well. I was going to say I was going to pick your brain on the challenges you faced and what your journey's been from your from a background that's not necessarily like the likes of London. What have you found, like any challenges that you overcame or anything that you noticed that's difficult for a filmmaker that's not from one of your more popular areas of the UK?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter where you come from. You don't have an advantage unless unless it's nepotism. But certainly growing up in Newcastle, London seemed like a far away place, let alone Hollywood. The notion of like, well, shit, I've got this dream, I want to make films. How the hell do I do it if I'm in Newcastle? Where do I begin? And it's probably like, the likes of reading about people like Ridley Scott, whatever, of like, well, if he could do it, if it's possible, well, why not? And we have a lot of talent comes from the Northeast, not just filmmaking talent, but particularly musical talent. So like, amazing artists come from the Northeast. So it didn't seem impossible. I just didn't know how. It wasn't like I saw the end goal. I just had no idea how to get there.
Yeah.
So it's been a step-by-step process, and every day is a challenge, and every day is a new experience. It's like it's not like it's suddenly not a challenge anymore. So like trying to get money for an independent film these days is a nightmare. Really difficult. So it's always a challenge, but I think maybe that's what keeps it exciting and keeps it interesting. I've often heard it called, when you get involved in the film industry, it's like it's an apprenticeship for life, because you never know it all. You never can know it all. Every film is a different set of problems. Every scene is a different set of problems. And you're never going to do the same thing twice. So it's always fresh. And, I think that keeps it exciting. So the challenge is always there. Maybe for a few filmmakers, they can rest on their laurels a little bit, that they can relax because they know that the next project's going to come and they're not going to have a problem with it. But most of us are grafters and have to stay grafters.
And I suppose because that's very much my my sensibilities. I'm always grafting. I'm always hustling to a degree. But is there any sort of one key piece of advice you would give to aspiring filmmakers from underrepresented regions, I guess? If you could give one piece of advice.
My advice has changed over the years. I used to just do the fairly traditional thing of saying, well, you just have to persevere. That's it. You've got to be so stubborn and single-minded. You've got to put every aspect of your life on hold in order to achieve it. If you think it's going to be comfortable, it's not. Forget your family, forget anything, it's like you're gonna have to sacrifice everything in order to get your films made. That's true. I think it still holds true. I think that circumstances have changed a little bit in that, you can now make a film on your phone and edit it on your laptop. That option did not exist anymore. You can release it on YouTube and get attention that way, if you have a singular talent, and you get it out there and people start talking about it, then, you could be set for life off the back of that. All of these things were never available to me when I was getting started. But they're there now. But it's not necessarily easier because there's just as much competition, if not more. Everybody can now do that, so therefore everybody is doing it. So it doesn't, how do you stand out from an even bigger crowd? It's tricky. It's tricky, but it does require determination. And the other piece of advice I give to anybody who's aspiring to be a director is don't be a dick, because I hear I talk to a lot of my crews over the years, and I hear so many stories of directors who come in and they may be experienced, they may be inexperienced, but they behave like complete dicks. That they're rude, they're disrespectful to people, and it makes the whole experience really unpleasant, and it doesn't necessarily make for better work. My whole thing is like, every single person on that crew is a cog in a machine. You take one cog out, the machine doesn't work. So you treat everybody with respect, and hopefully they'll treat you with respect back.
Absolutely agree.
And also, it's that a crew who respects you will want to work for you. And if they want to work for you, everything will come together so much better. If they don't, if you don't respect them and they don't respect you, all they have to do is slow down a little bit. They just walk as opposed to run, or, just take their time a little bit as opposed to hustling it on. And they can fuck your days. They can fuck your schedule. They don't even have to actively do anything. They just have to slow down a little bit, and they can just make your life misery. So it's you've got to get your crew behind you. I think for me, it's like lead from the front. Always lead from the front. Lead by example. Of like, that's where you are. You're not just screaming and shouting at people, and I don't know. It's that whole thing. It's just like, you just got to put on a go show. It could be fun. That's the thing. It's like we got into this business because we love it and it's fun, and it should be fun. It shouldn't be hell going to work every day. It shouldn't be a nightmare. It shouldn't be unpleasantness. It doesn't necessarily guarantee better work by doing it that way. It doesn't at all. It's like, I hear of like horrible shoots that make great films, but by the same token, there's a lot of great shoots that make great films as well. So it's not like there's a rule that as a director you have to be a dick. And I think in a lot of cases it is because of directors compensating for their own inexperience or inadequacy, that rather than just acknowledge it or ask for help or utilize a crew of amazing talents around them, thinking that they have to solve every problem themselves, is like, well, they turn nasty because it's compensating. But it's just unnecessary. That's the thing. If you've done a good job of surrounding yourself with really amazing crew, they're going to come up with some amazing ideas, and you should listen to them. So that's my advice.
No, and it's tremendous advice, and I've been on a few sets. Luckily, I've had the amazing experience of being on a few sets now, and I completely agree with what you're seeing in terms of what you can get out of a crew just by being nice. I'm not going to mention any names, but I was on a set once with a director, an American director. I'm not going to name which movie it was, but his way of sort of wrangling people in was, he came in, he made himself known, and he announced in a very American fashion, I'm the sheriff of this town. Okay, guys, I'm the sheriff. You do what I say. And that was his mentality. And it was just like hilarious because it was filming in England. It was filming in Scotland. So a lot of the people, especially the extras and crew, were Scottish. And it's just like, man, I think you've just lost the respect of 90% of the people in this room. It was hilarious.
Well, that's a classic example, because like, if you come over, that might work in the States. I'm probably sure it doesn't. But if we come over here, people are just going to laugh at you. That's just like, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Whereas if you come on board and you inspire your crew and you get them in on what you're making, you involve them, they will work their arse off for you because they want to make a good job of it.
Absolutely.
Not I'm the freaking sheriff. Because part of the problem is that being a director is like one of the, it is to a certain extent a dictatorship. Like, it's it's not a democracy on set; it is a dictatorship. So some people, power goes to their head, and but that's not good leadership. That's the difference. It's like there's good power, there's power, and there's good leadership, and you want to be on the side of good leadership as opposed to just some power mad idiot.
No, and I completely agree with that. And I mean, on that note as well, and you said it yourself that your advice has changed over the years, especially because everyone can do it now, everyone is. So would you say that obviously the landscape of things is changing for the future of, well, filmmakers, but also entertainment as well, because it's not the same as it was with the likes of streaming platforms, and AI's on its way in as well. Do you think that's going to have
No, things are changing.
It already is,
rapidly.
I suppose, having a massive impact.
Yeah, things are changing constantly, rapidly. Nobody quite knows where it's going to go. It's scary, and it's been scary for a while. I mean, Christ, I wish I'd been born 20 years earlier and got into the business 20 years earlier when things were a lot more certain. Like you made a film, it was going to go into the cinema, and like money was going to come back, and you could actually get money out of your movies. But nowadays, unless you're in the elite, you're struggling to make a living as a filmmaker, and you're struggling to get you don't get money back from the films you make. It's so difficult now.
Yeah.
And I say it's changing all the time with AI. One thing I do believe in, though, is that it's not going anywhere. We love watching movies. We love watching TV. So one way or another, we got to figure out a way of doing it, and a way of doing it that would sustain the people who are making it, because without them, there ain't going to be anything. So, so it has to work for everybody. But cinema, and so it's like it's not going to go away. It's not going to become extinct. Like it's. Like we've had it now, we like it. It'll change. I think the idea of movies are just costing too much, so that has to change. But it's not going to go away. It's just going to change into something else, and it's just a question of like, well, how do you stay ahead of the curve? And I think there's always, although like a lot of the kids these days are like
the attention span.
Their attention span is so much shorter. And they're watching YouTube and stuff like that. So well, that's fine, but they're going to grow up, and when they grow up, they're going to want more substantial material to watch. And that's the generation.
I hope that's the same. I really do.
I'm sure it is. I think it's just people want long form movies as much as reading books and telling stories and going to the theater and stuff like that. It's not going to go away. It's just a question of how it's ultimately put together. I mean, I say I could be talking out my arse, but I think that's the case. I think that's the case.
No, I mean, I couldn't have put it better myself, and thank you very much for obviously lending your insight, especially from someone that started in a stone's throw away from myself. It's tremendous to hear, obviously, your experiences and everything that we've ran through today, in terms of obviously your experiences as a filmmaker. Thank you very much for the insight, and also going through some of my favorite movies that you've made, and have certainly inspired me over the years. And I guess all I was going to end on really was some parting questions that I ask of all my guests. Are there any? It can be a horror director, given your background. It can be just a filmmaker in general. But I was going to say, is there any sort of emerging or new filmmakers that you've got your eye on at the moment that you're sort of like, I really like what they do, and I'm interested to see what they turn out next?
Yeah, I mean, those absolutely there is. So there's certain directors, they're not new and emerging, but like the certain directors, like I think so, you Ridley Scott's, or David Fincher's, or whatever, that I'm always gonna I want to check out their next movie. I want them to do something interesting or visual or whatever it is. I will watch their movie, but it doesn't necessarily mean I'm gonna like their movies all the time. They can be a bit hit and miss, absolutely. At the moment, I mean, I think that Denis Villeneuve is like the guy working today that I just like. I love everything he does. I think he's absolutely phenomenal, and can't wait to see what he's going to do next. I mean, it's hard to say. Like, he's kind of new in the sense that he started late. He only started directing in his 40s.
Yeah.
So but he's been around a while now. But he's phenomenal. I like people. I want to see what Gareth Edwards is going to do next. I know he's doing a Jurassic Park movie, but I love the creator. I love what he does. Gareth Evans as well. The Raid. It's just like, I mean, I'm waiting to see his new movie because I just love his action stuff.
Brilliant
It's phenomenal.
choices. Yeah.
James Nunn as well, I think, is what he's done with his low budget action stuff as well. The one shot movies are phenomenal. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of a key group at the moment that I'm interested in. Definitely. And then I'm waiting for Furiosa because George Miller's just like been a complete hero of mine, and Fury Road is one of the greatest action movies ever made. So I just cannot wait for Furiosa this year. So
agreed.
yeah. That
It's one of the only trailers I'm enjoying at the moment.
Yeah.
Well, I guess on the final of the parting questions, now that we know who you've got your eye on, I'll start with your background. So, what is your favorite horror movie moment? Not movie necessarily, but your favorite horror movie moment of all time. It doesn't have to be within your favorite horror movie.
I think the thing that's jumped to mind would be the chest burster from Alien, and I wish I wish I'd been there, in the cinema with a full crowd, seeing that for the first time, not having a clue what was coming. Just to experience that would have been incredible. Because even when I saw the film for the first time, I think I'd read about it, or my uncle had told me about it because he'd been to see it at the cinema. So it was a slight spoiler there, but to have been there and seen that without any warning whatsoever must have been an astonishing moment.
Now that we've covered your favorite horror movie moment of all time, this is I guess a bigger one, but what is your favorite movie moment of all time?
I'm going to say the truck chase from Raiders. I think the truck chase from Raiders of the Lost Ark is just phenomenal in so many ways. That's a tough call. I mean, I think. I'll also say
it's
the
a bigger question for sure.
Yeah, it is. I'll also say the opening shot of Star Wars: A New Hope. Seeing that on the big screen in 1977 when it came out was like such a revelation. I mean, I didn't get to experience the chest burster in a theater or whatever, but I did see Star Wars in the cinema, and just hearing the audience react to that moment and seeing it for the first time on the big screen was just. It changed cinema forever. It changed my life forever. I fell in love with going to the movies just from watching that movie there. But that scene where the Star Destroyer comes overhead, it's just like, it was just truly awe-inspiring. And I hadn't seen that in a movie before at that time. And, and it's still an amazing moment.
Absolutely. It's the kind of movie that was made for cinema. It's the kind of movie that makes you love cinema. For sure.
Absolutely. And yeah, just that, George, man, open big.
The final question here, just because obviously jacked in, as well as my name being Jack, it's also a nice nod to The Matrix. So we always ask all our guests, if you were sitting in the red Chesterfield, Morpheus presents you with the red pill and the blue pill. Neil Marshall, which one are you taking and why?
You have to take the red pill. I mean, what does the blue pill mean? You go home? I mean, what's the point of that? No, you got to
forget everything that you'd been told. Yeah.
Yeah. No, you got to take the red pill. You got to go down the rabbit hole, and
down the rabbit hole.
Absolutely. I think it's just like when you're presented with opportunities, it's like you've got two choices. Like you take them and go on and see what happens, and like you don't want to live with the regret of not doing something. So yeah. Red pill for me.
Brilliant. Don't want to live in blissful ignorance.
No. I mean, there's plenty that do, and maybe they're very happy, but I don't know. That's not me. I have to see what's around the next corner and over the next hill,
No, it's the same with myself. I'm a very curious individual, so I would definitely want to see how deep that rabbit hole goes. I'm on the same page. Neil Marshall, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the show. And is there anything... any projects coming up? Anything that you want to plug? Anything that we should watch out for? Anything that we should look forward to? Even
so I've got a new movie coming out this summer. Should be in cinemas in the UK and in the US called Duchess, which is a gangster movie or a crime thriller, I guess, action thriller about diamond smuggling, and I shot that in 2022. So I got that coming out, and I'm just finishing a like a giallo slasher movie that was shot in Malta last year.
I love a giallo. I love a good giallo.
Just finishing now, so I'm not quite sure when that's going to come out. But they're the next things on the cards, and then whatever. I'm writing a whole bunch of stuff now, and I want to get back on set soon.
Awesome. Well, Neil Marshall fans everywhere, you've heard it here. Watch this space. I absolutely love a good giallo, so I'm definitely going to keep my eyes peeled for that one.
And I got a couple of projects actually I'm developing to come and do up in Newcastle, so that's when I come back home.
Wow.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to get them off the ground.
I know, like, I'll keep an eye out in my local. I might spot you.
Absolutely. We're around. Well, if we get up there and we get everything set up, we should come to set. So.
No, that's an invitation that I don't even need to think about. Like, I'm definitely accepting that. That would be absolutely brilliant. I'd love to do that.
Top.
Thank you so much to Neil Marshall once again for getting jacked in from one Northeastian to another. It's definitely a word. But yes, if you liked what you heard, if you liked what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. And to all movie maniacs, film fanatics, or if you know anyone that mixes in those circles, please pay us a visit or tell them to pay us a visit at jackedinmovies.com. We've got articles, reviews, recommendations, weekly video shout-outs from yours truly. Or you can visit us at our socials, Instagram jackedin_, YouTube jackedin_, Twitter or X jackedin_, Facebook jackedin official, or TikTok jackedin, nice and simple. But yeah, if you don't like movies, then, I don't know, read a good book. A, B, see you later.
Well, it's the all-new sensational gateway into movie culture with articles, reviews, recommendations, and weekly video shoutouts to old, new, niche, good, bad, and ugly movies alike. Head on over now to jackedinmovies.com and get yourself jacked in.